Joined by, again, former U.S. Attorney David Kelly and another David Frum from The Atlantic and a former Bush White House official. David Frum, your view of this?
Well, the appointment is certainly alarming. It's also kind of ludicrous. Unlike the Tulsi Gabbard appointment, which is just plain sinister all the way through. A thoroughly untrustworthy person to be head of Director of National Intelligence. But I want to bring a message to cheer people up a little bit. Because one of the things that you would expect of a president with a big agenda is you try to move you have very limited time to get a big agenda done. You want to move your people into place as rapidly as possible. So a president with a big agenda, an Obama, Ronald Reagan, they pick broadly acceptable people. They don't pick some Marxist agitator to be Secretary of the Treasury. They pick Timothy Geithner. They don't pick some oddball. They pick respectable people who can get through the Senate pretty easily because the clock's ticking. You get your people in place, and then you start legislating with the very finite time that you have, especially with a House majority as tiny as the present one. Donald Trump has decided he's going to take minutes off the board and use them to have a huge fight over a Attorney General who is loathed within his own party on a secret ballot among Republicans. Matt Gaetz would not be appointed to anything. They wouldn't let him in the caucus. They wouldn't let him serve lunch. A director of national intelligence, again, who is regarded with extreme mistrust by almost every Republican senator, and a secretary of defense who's kind of a comical, seems to be an entertaining enough presence on television, but to run the world's largest and most lethal fighting force, it's absurd. It's crazy. And we are going to spend weeks and weeks probably engaged in this battle. And all of those are deducted from Donald Trump's time to get anything of substance done.
Yeah, you make a great point, Born, of your experience, and it overlaps somewhat with what Nicole Wallace was discussing in our handoff tonight, that this is a complex process, and you're not putting in people who are, A, competent to carry out a broad-based set of policies, and B, as you're saying, might not even get into position. One of the reasons Gaetz has infuriated so many people in both parties is his partisan, selective, and some would say deceitful approach in the House. Now he needs Congress and the Senate to get into the job. I did press him on this because, David, it's inside baseball to some. But one of the ways that he went after McCarthy was by working with the opposing team to oust his guys. And he managed to then become really unpopular in both parties. Take a look at our exchange on that. Explain to us in logical English why it's bad when he does it and okay when you do it.
Well, I had to work with Democrats to remove McCarthy because he worked with Democrats to violate the agreements he had made with us. Had Democrats or had McCarthy not worked with Democrats on the debt limit deal in violation of the guardrails we had set up, certainly I wouldn't have worked with Democrats to remove him.
David Frum, does it matter that he is so opposed in Congress across the parties, both for this on-ramp to potential confirmation hearings and, if confirmed, into how he leads?
It certainly does. Compare and contrast Matt Gaetz with the Attorney General in Donald Trump, the first Attorney General in Donald Trump's first term, Jeff Sessions. Now, Sessions was a strongly conservative person, quite political, quite partisan, maybe not the kind of figure that David Kelly would have wanted to see in the job. But he was also famously courteous, famously respectful, the author of the most beautiful thank you notes, which he sent to everybody on every occasion. He was liked, admired, and trusted as a human being, even if people thought he was maybe a little hard-edged in his politics. In the Senate, that counts. Matt Gaetz is the opposite. Even people who agree with him don't like him.
David, I want to build on that point, David Kelly, to show how Fox News, which Donald Trump clearly watches, it's where he got his Pentagon pick, viewed Gaetz.
I can't tell you the psychiatric diagnosis. I can just tell you it's dangerous for the Republican Party.
You need to put your country ahead of your own personal hatred. Man, you got to get control of it, brother. But he won't.
I would compare him to that toddler that we've all seen at the family barbecue, eating toilet paper, shoving Cheerios up his nose to get attention.
How does that apply to this job that you know something about? You've reported in as one of 93 U.S. attorneys to the AG if he were to get it.
A lot of ways, because, again, it's not just the competence, and his colleagues are talking about what kind of temperament he has, which speaks to competence, but it's also the appearance of that. And when you have that, you also have a bunch of people working underneath you who need to feel confident in the person who's leading them in order for them, as Brit was saying, to show up each day and do what the Justice Department does. I think that they face a fundamental problem here where if he's going to come in and if he's going to pursue that agenda and he's going to clear house, I think the Justice Department will all but come to a stop for quite a long time.
Wow. David Frum, on the sort of legal politics of all this, if you will, I'm very curious your view, and I'm catching up with you here since last Tuesday. Donald Trump left office with a 34% approval rating and then helped organize and fan a insurrection sedition that was widely opposed initially. We all know that. He came back, and it was a comeback, with about 51% of the nation. And so I'm curious what you think when you look at these early picks now about the delta, the gap between what people actually thought of him then in real time based on his governance, this 4-year amnesia thing, and what he's now doing. Because it seems to me that you, Nicole, and other smart people have started to observe that even if you believe some of his promises on prices, inflation, immigration, the early picks seem more fixated on his own casting and vengeance than policy.
There are two paths ahead for the Trump presidency. One is the path of successful, sinister consolidation of power for bad ends. And that means, as the Wall Street Journal reported, making it easier for him to fire generals, making it easier for him to remake the military in his own image, for him to round up people, to do a lot of things that that require a very effective presidency, maybe a kind of dark presidency, but an effective one. And then there's the path of chaos, self-indulgent, bitter, childish, petty. And the question, and it looks to me with these early picks, he's choosing the path of chaos, not the path of consolidation.
And briefly, I'm going to jump in only because, I do that as a questioner. When you say that, David Frum, you think that is a different type of problem for the opposition or resistance, or it is better for the opposition? Chaos.
If you're going to put together a fascist police state, you wouldn't ask Matt Gaetz to run it.
Is that a type of burn?
He's too sloppy. He's too sloppy. He's too careless. He's too irresponsible. He's not going to get to work on time every day, doing the dirty work that you want him to do. He's going to have indulgences of his own. He's going to be caught up in scandals that are not relevant to the job. He should be married to a nice, safe Mrs. Gaetz and not have this cloud of sexual scandal over his head. He should have his financial affairs in order. None of those things are going to be. Every one of those things detracts from the mission Donald Trump wants him to do. If the mission is consolidate power and build a nasty police state.